Humanist Take on the World, Episode 15. Climate Change, Problems, and Distractions. Welcome to an episode of Humanist Take on the World. I am Dustin, and joining me is...
Lauren, hooray!
Yeah, it's been a long time since you've been on the show.
No, I know. It's been an awful summer.
Yep.
It's been terrible between the COVID and the norovirus and the hurt back and the hurt shoulder and family drama. It's like, oh my gosh, it never ends.
And the heat.
And now the smoke.
Yeah. So, climate change. We did also get one message about some weird noise that was happening just when I was talking in the last episode. And you will probably be hearing it this time as well. That is because it is fucking hot. And if we don't keep that fan on in the living room, then we will have to abandon the room for the rest of the day. So I'm sorry, the sound quality isn't as good as I normally like, but to get an episode out as hot as it's been, that is the cost. The weather should be cooling down soon, and we won't be needing that while recording. Right now, yeah, if you're in the Western U.S. or Canada, you are under several blankets of smoke.
Yep.
If you look at the air map, the airnow.gov map, and you actually try to count how many different layers of smoke, like in Boise, I think we're at 6 or 7.
Yeah. My
parents are under about 12.
Yeah, between these fires in Northern California, Western Oregon, apparently all of Idaho.
Yeah,
like
all the mountains.
All of central Idaho's on fire right now.
Central and northern.
Western
all the
Montana. It's bad. I mean, we say that every summer, but it's bad.
And so for one example, the first full year I lived in Boise, that would have been the summer of 2011. The sun did not shine through all of August and September.
Right. Yeah.
Because of smoke. Completely socked in with smoke. A few years ago, there was a research plane collecting air quality samples to actually see what wildfire smoke air quality was actually like, not just going with particulate counts.
Oh, yeah, because particulate counts don't tell you they don't identify what's in the smoke, just that there is.
Yeah.
Well, of course.
And yeah, that one, pretty crazy. And they did that in Boise because Boise is... If there's anywhere that has smoke, it is basically always Boise.
There are airstreams that cover the...
Atmospheric river.
Yeah, atmospheric rivers that go from the coast through Idaho into like Montana. It carries everything. The
reason why Yellowstone has so much greenery is that atmospheric river that goes through the Snake River Plain.
Carries moisture, but...
And it blows through Boise, where it also often gets trapped in the Dust Bowl of the Boise foothills. But if you look at the maps of the mountains or drive through Nevada and you find all the mountains there run north to south, then you've got some really big ones in the middle of nowhere in Oregon that most people don't even know exist. Hart Mountain and Steens Mountain.
Steens!
Then you add in the Blue Mountains and the Ochocos and the John Day Mountains, and you basically have a funnel that funnels moisture, yes, and smoke from basically Stockton, California to Portland.
Yeah.
Well, to Salem, Oregon. All of that gets funneled towards...
Not necessarily Portland, but yeah, to Salem, definitely.
It's crazy.
And yeah, it's ancient lakes giving way and creating massive floods, Bonneville and all that. Our entire geography is based on mountains and floods. And that creates these little gaps in the mountain ranges that funnels smoke, funnels moisture, and makes it a living nightmare for those of us who have sensitive lungs.
Yeah. We were, this weekend, Labor Day weekend, we're supposed to be visiting my mom, but had to cancel that trip because there's a fire about 10 miles from them.
Yeah.
This fire the firefighters are doing a great job. It's the Rum Creek fire. They're doing a great job of doing fire control lines, and basically all the growth that's happening in the last several days has been controlled burns to contain the fire so it doesn't destroy the community of Merlin.
Yeah.
That's, bad. One thing interesting...
Ruined my vacation, though. I'm taking it personally. Fire.
Now, one thing interesting is with these containment lines, there's 4 or 5 that were already there from burn scars from the last couple years.
Right. Right, because it's always on fire. Every summer.
I moved to Grants Pass.
No matter how much brush gets burned.
I moved to Grants Pass in 1992. The first time there was a big fire in that area was 2002 with the Biscuit Fire that burned something like 700,000 acres, mostly in wilderness. And then
a lot of wilderness there.
In the last 10 years, it started out about every other year there was a fire there. And now it's moved to every year there's a fire there. And the day that fire started, it actually started like 8 different fires.
Yeah. Lightning storms will pass through. And that's what happened with, you can almost see the travel path of the thunderstorms from a month ago. How they went up through central Idaho.
Yeah.
And I was watching them. Because I love lightning. I love thunderstorms. I was watching the lightning move across Boise, and then they start heading north, start trending up towards Montana, and then you look at the fire map now, it's like, oh, that's what happened.
Yeah. And with those, when you have 8 or 10 fires start in a 10-mile by 20-mile area, they knock out the ones that are around people. They don't worry about the ones on public land.
No, they can't. They can't. There's no resources, and we don't even know if it's a good thing to knock the fires out because the brush needs to burn. My skepticism is the places that burn over and over and over again. That's okay. So, because for years we never let fires burn.
Yeah.
So all that brush, and it was a tinderbox. It would all build up. And then we'd have massive wildfires. And they said, controlled burns and letting certain wildfires burn through will help damper that down. But now we're getting places that are getting fires every year. So that's not necessarily true. But it sucks just in general.
Let's add to it with climate change.
Well, that's the big tick on the box, right? It's
been interesting seeing the climate in Boise change while I've lived here. Those first couple years, every afternoon in May and most afternoons in August, there were thunderstorms.
Yeah, it
often
would hit
50 miles an hour.
30. Temperature would drop 15, 20 degrees. So you'd go from 95 to 75 as the storm rolled through, dump a little bit of rain, not much, but a little bit of rain, and it would cool the evenings down.
Yeah.
And we just don't get that anymore.
It was also such that, prior to 2010, Boise's rainfall averaged out to 1 inch a month. And it was pretty consistent, about 0.7 to 1.4 per month. Okay. Now, it's normal to have 3 months in a row with not a single drop of rain.
Yeah. I know. That was a headline last week, that Death Valley had more rain in a month than Boise did.
Yep.
Ugh.
And
gross.
It's climate change. It's, when you look at an area like Boise, okay, going from a semi-arid river valley to straight up desert isn't that destructive of climate change. What's going on in like Southern Oregon and Northern California is it's going from moderate... Okay, actually, in the hills, it's going from rainforest to dry forest.
Yeah, temperate rainforest to tinderbox.
We know what the dry forests in Eastern Oregon look like because we camp in those every so often. There's not a lot of undergrowth. The trees are several feet apart. It's not all that dense. Central Idaho is about the same. Those are the more dry forests. When you get to northern Idaho, northern Montana, parts of central Idaho, southwestern Oregon, okay, all of western Oregon, you've got rainforests that are drying out.
Yeah, which leaves all these big trees that are used to at least some moisture not getting any.
Used to 40 inches of rain a year or more.
Which makes them more susceptible to beetle kills and just drying out, just straight up drought. But disease, wiping out forests, that was what we were worried about 20 years ago, was beetle kills. It was like, that's... Now we don't even think about the bugs. Can't waste our time on bugs because everything's going up in flames.
And when you shift from, like, the density of plant life that can survive and can handle small fires at 40 inches of rain a year, if they go down to 20 sustained, the biological holding, like, sustainability of that area probably drops to about a third.
Well, yeah, I mean, and Idaho hosts a lot of fire-dependent trees, ponderosa pine, lodgepole pine, where they literally cannot reproduce unless there's fire. But they have to survive the fire first.
Yeah.
And it is not until very recently that it's been so hot and so dry that the entire tree is going down, versus in the past where the fires would burn through the brush and maybe damage some of the tops, but basically leave the tree whole and unscathed. That's not the case anymore. We're losing tons of forest. And the more forest you lose, the hotter it gets. And
yeah.
So we're seeing all this firsthand.
And then with the
everybody is in their own way.
Oh, yeah. With the heat, we are not done with 100-degree days, and it's September now. So these 100-degree days we're getting this week don't count to the record-breaking number of 100-degree days that Boise had this summer, because that only counts June, July, and August.
Back when summer was only June, July, and August, and not September as well.
The previous record was 21 days. We had 24 this year. This was the hottest August on record and the second hottest summer on record, because June and July were cool and wet. Or June and early July were cool and wet, whereas last summer, the last part of June and all of July were brutally hot.
Yeah. So everything feels a month off here right now. Not to say that the cool and wet spring, helped at all. With preparing us for the brutal hot summers. But like, we're getting super hot summers and wildfires. And then
one of the points I wanted to make with the thunderstorms. We used to have lots of thunderstorms in the summer, and they brought rain. It's so dry now in the summer that we don't get very many thunderstorms. And when they do happen, everything is so dry that they just start fires.
Floods and fires. The ground can't absorb anything that does drop.
And last year we had monsoonal moisture making it up to Boise, which has never happened before.
Yeah.
If you're not in the West, you probably still have smoke, but also flooding.
Yeah. The flooding it's insane. It is insane. I always joke that the U.S. is the worst place in the world. Because no matter where you are in the country, there is a natural disaster out to get you. You're either on fire, you're either being blown away by hurricanes, you're under 14 feet of snow and ice, or you're getting flooded out.
Or earthquakes, or tornadoes.
Or
hurricanes.
Seriously, we are like... I hear Australia's also pretty bad, but the U.S., man, we're champions at trying to of weather-related destruction.
It's also... One way the United States doesn't make sense is when you've got one half of the country flooding and one half of the country on fire.
Or just in severe drought.
What kind of government could actually handle that? To deal with hurricanes destroying cities and flooding out cities, and just rain flooding out cities. And when you need a full federal response... in Jackson, Mississippi, and Sacramento, and Grants Pass, and Medford, and throughout Montana, and
Yeah.
How? And we've seen the government isn't able to keep up with all
What
of
we
it.
should do is put all the natural disaster stuff under the military and use the military budget. National Guard guys, yeah, they can start doing sandbagging. They don't need to be
Oh, they do.
I know.
National Guard does.
I know.
All the roadblocks in around the Rum Creek fire are all being manned by National
Let's
Guard.
get the Army in there too. Sure, they're bored, right? They got nothing better to do except for fly jet planes around.
All right, so
The Army, I know, but I'm being facetious.
yeah, so we're seeing it. This is what is happening at 1.2 degrees of global climate increase since the start of industrialization. The Paris Climate Accord had the goal of keeping the 2050 temperature increase to 1.5 degrees, knowing that would be a total of 1.7 degrees of warming by the end of the century.
Yeah.
Another half degree of warming does not mean your summers go up half a degree Celsius. Another half degree of warming means your summers get 10 degrees hotter, your winters get 20 degrees colder, the rain gets twice as hard, and the droughts are twice as dry.
Right. It's more about the extremes, not so much the average.
Yeah.
Which is why year to year you can't say, oh, well, this was a cooler summer, so take that, global warming. I was like, yeah, just wait.
Yeah,
Your winter is going to suck.
our summer in Boise was not a record-setting summer for being the hottest average temperature for the summer. Second place after last year. That's bad.
Yeah.
When number 1 and 2 are consecutive years, that's bad.
Yeah. I mean, but anybody who is cognizant of, they may not like the term global warming, they may not like the term climate change, but you cannot deny that there are some severe changes going on with the weather.
And
That is affecting the total climate.
yeah,
Whether you're politically inclined to call it one thing or another, everybody's noticed it. The problem is whether or not people believe that it's human caused and whether or not human intervention can do anything about it.
yeah.
And that's where there's been a lot of misinformation and there's a lot of confusion still.
And distraction and competing objectives and ideological opinions and greed and you name it,
Yeah.
it's out there.
Yeah.
What we know is that at this point, we are burning fossil fuels at about twice the rate that the Earth is absorbing them, is using them.
Yeah.
It's actually worse than that with the number of years worth of sequestered carbon that we are extracting every year is way worse than that. But even if it's just double the amount of carbon that's being captured every year, that's bad.
That's really bad.
If it's several times over, that's really bad.
And what's crazy is it's gotten worse, not better.
Yeah.
I would have thought that with all the windmills going up and the push for solar is not even a drop in the bucket. It doesn't matter because more people, especially during the pandemic. Oh, the pandemic effed us over big time because all of a sudden we want everything delivered to our homes, wrapped in plastic, and no personal responsibility at all.
Yeah.
Of course, then if you focus too much on the personal responsibility part, that falls under the distraction biz and
Right.
a little different. But
All right. Before we get to the distractions,
before we get to that,
yes, I have structured the order on this such that listeners can just hit skip and go to the next podcast on their player when we piss them off.
okay.
I'm not going to be surprised if we don't piss off 70% of the listeners by the time we're done.
I mean, I
one way
bet
or
that you
another.
hear us out, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's a sensitive subject. We get it.
So the actual problem is that we are pulling sequestered carbon out of the ground mostly from the Permian and Carboniferous eras. This is carbon that when it was captured
by trees,
there was so much carbon locked up in trees and plankton that the CO2 levels in the atmosphere got so low and the oxygen levels got so high that the Earth froze.
It's crazy. Okay, so yeah, it is. Look into it. Wikipedia, it is a rabbit hole when you realize how the carbon-oxygen cycle was so, what we would consider to be so totally unbalanced and not livable. But there you go.
Now, when it happens over the course of millions of years, life has time to adapt.
Yeah.
When we're...
We'll find a way.
When we are doing... And even with that kind of millions of years of changes, the Great Dying, there have been several Great Dyings where nearly all life on Earth was wiped out because of climate change. In most cases, it was oxygen levels getting too high, carbon dioxide levels getting too low, and the Earth freezing. That is really, really bad. We've also had hothouse Earths at several times where there is no ice on the planet. When that happens slowly, life can adapt. When it happens quickly, life can't. One of the reasons is there is a particular point in the warming cycle where the Mediterranean regions, not meaning the Mediterranean Ocean, but that kind of climate region, goes through desertification. In the U.S., we're talking California and the South, turning into deserts. Then there is a period after that where those regions get really, really wet. Life does pretty well when those areas are warm and wet. They don't do well when there are massive bands of desert.
Yeah.
Way worse than what we have right now. It's...
Desertification is the step beyond drought, which we are currently seeing happening around here.
The Southwest in particular.
Where, even sagebrush doesn't do well. Junipers die out. That's, yeah.
Yeah, if it can kill a juniper, that's really something.
I know, those things are crazy.
The Oregon state government is trying to prune the number of junipers because there's way too much because of all the fire suppression with the brush fires in Oregon, which has resulted in juniper forests, which should not ever be a thing, and they can't kill them.
Yeah.
So yes, the actual problem is that we keep pumping sequestered carbon out of the ground and we are burning it.
And instead of millions of years, we've cut that down to 150.
Yeah. The actual solutions are stop pumping carbon out of the ground.
Full stop.
And electrify everything.
As best we can.
If you can't electrify it, that's where hydrogen comes in. There is no solution. Like, if anybody writes and says what Elon Musk says, I will blow up on you. Because, Elon Musk says that hydrogen is never going to work. There are some situations where we are going to need clean energy in a easily refillable form, like for converting trucks. You're not likely to have long-haul trucks running off of batteries.
No.
That would be insane.
Which have their own issues.
Yeah. Do we really want to be mining?
Whenever I mention you got to cut the fossil fuels and electrify, that's the one of the things that people are going to shout at you about is, but heavy metals and rare earth minerals are harder to come by and possibly more damaging to the earth than so-and-so. It's like, well, okay. There's no perfect solution, but there is the solution that will help hopefully prevent, a third to half of the population of humanity from dying. Or not.
And honestly, if we can, the mining is ugly. It's disgusting. It's destructive. It is literally most of that mining for making lithium-ion batteries is happening in Africa. They are clear-cutting rainforest and digging giant holes in the middle of the jungle.
Yeah.
That is not good for
That's not
climate
good.
change.
No.
But it is better than the alternative. And that damage can be recovered much faster. Like, you can restore that ground and allow the rainforest to recover way faster than we can get carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere with a half-life of 1,000 years.
Yeah.
So, yeah. We need to bite the bullet and do that. We also need to open up the mining in Montana and Utah.
Yeah. I personally am violently opposed to that. The idea of especially open pit mines scares the crap out of me. They are because they don't restore them.
Yeah.
Yes, theoretically, it is easy to restore the land, but they don't.
Yeah.
They will do an open pit mine and then they'll leave it, or come back in claiming that they're going to fix it, and then they just keep destroying it for something else, like what they're trying to do in Idaho with gold and all sorts of stuff. It's like mining for me has always been a really like nasty thing, but there's the long-term detrimental effects of climate change versus the short-term, relatively short-term being 50 to 100 years, detrimental effects of the mining. I'm not comfortable with either or, and I do waffle a little bit, but I mean, I get it. It's terrible. Nobody wants to see it happen.
Yeah. And we need reforms. There are legal reforms needed to help fix some of those issues, because what happens with mines and oil wells both.
Oh, the oil wells, the abandoned oil wells.
Is company creates an LLC that actually does the operation, and then they bankrupt the LLC by the time they're done extracting what they need. So that way they go bankrupt and they don't have to clean it up.
Yeah.
We need major liability reforms.
Yeah.
Also, to a certain extent, if it's mines that are necessary to help fight climate change, I'm okay with the government picking up the tab. I think that's worth it. Have the government handle the cleanup.
I mean, I'm not an expert in the field, so I don't know. But yeah, the way things are going, you'd think that, I'm sure there are programs out there, federal programs to help cover certain things. But the whole
we saw it at
an LLC, go bankrupt, no restitution, no cleanup, that's been the name of the game for the past 50 years.
Yeah.
At least.
But we've even seen it with some of the restoration with Emerald Creek.
Yeah.
With the garnet mining. And they've done amazing work restoring that environment. And it's the government that did that.
Yeah.
Not the mining companies.
No, God, no. Not the... Anyway.
So, but the electrifying everything, it is a multi-step process where you need to get the appliances switched first and have the grid follow. An electric car completely charging off of a 100% coal-powered grid is cleaner than a gas-burning car. Not by much, but in the lifetime of the car, it is cleaner. Less carbon emissions. But by getting the cars all switched over, then the grid can follow. And the grid, you're talking multi-million-dollar projects. Those are slower. So it's replace gas furnaces with heat pumps. It's replace gas cooktops with induction cooktops. It's replace gas cars with electric cars. Replace coal plants with natural gas plants. Replace natural gas plants with all the other renewable and zero carbon, including nuclear.
Yeah. And there are pros and cons to each one, but you got to focus on the big picture what's hard, especially for, I think, particularly in America, is seeing this as not only just a big picture thing, but seeing this as being 100-year big picture thing. These steps we take now are going to have to, are meant to affect our children or our grandchildren, not necessarily make our lives better.
Yeah.
And that's hard. And right now we're in a very political situation where we've been trying to focus on future stuff, and now people seem to be wanting more me, make our lives more comfortable because we're getting older. Screw the kids. It's very, it's hard for humanity as a whole to look towards, do anything that doesn't benefit us directly now. And sometimes getting an electric vehicle when there aren't a lot of electric chargers around is a very painful baby step to take for people. But that's maybe what needs to happen to get it going.
This is going to help segue into the personal responsibility conundrum. It is hard to ask somebody who doesn't have the money to be buying a new car,
any car, much less a new car,
to buy an electric car. And if you're out in the West, there are lots of areas where you need a car with a pretty damn good battery to actually be able to make the distances.
Yeah. 60-mile range ain't going to do it.
No.
They'll get you to the store and back twice. Maybe.
The infrastructure needs to be improved, and the automakers need to scale up the manufacturing. And this is where the personal responsibility conundrum comes in. The chargers aren't going to be installed if there isn't the demand. The demand won't exist if the cars aren't out there. The cars won't be out there if people aren't buying them. And the automakers can't scale up if people don't keep buying them.
Right.
Which means those who are privileged enough to be able to afford an electric car absolutely should, to help move things forward. Those who are not privileged enough to be able to afford an electric car need to not be shamed about it.
Yeah. Yeah, this summer with the gas prices, it was amazing how many articles basically came out nonchalantly saying just go buy an electric vehicle. And the backlash that created was hilarious. Because of course people can't just go out and buy an electric vehicle when they are scraping together pennies to pay for gas. That's not the target. You cannot tell a single mom with 3 kids to just go buy an EV next time. It's like, no. That's not the personal responsibility target that we need to be going for.
Now, yet. That's changing.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, it is changing, but
the next year's Chevy Bolt is supposed to be like around $25,000. That's affordable for a lot more people.
Yes.
Not affordable for everybody, but affordable for a lot of people.
Until we start getting electric vehicles that last long enough to be sold as used.
And the batteries
get
cheap enough to make that worthwhile.
Yeah. So we're getting there. It's slow, but
some of the numbers I've seen,
we still need to focus on public transportation and that kind of thing more, obviously, especially out here in the West where it's non-existent. But the personal responsibility thing is something that Dustin and I have been we've been noticing it for years anyway, just because diet.
Mm-hmm.
It's your personal responsibility that if you want to save the earth, you need to stop eating beef. How many of you have seen that, where you need to cut down on your meat because meat uses so much blah, blah, blah? It's like...
Okay, we are going to be getting to beef.
Okay, but it's not that it's not that simple. It's up to the individual to save the world. It's not going to happen. Governments, corporations, and maybe one less Taylor Swift in the world.
The carbon footprint idea, which we've since seen the water footprint developed based off of that.
Yes.
The carbon footprint was invented by the Chevron marketing department.
Yeah.
To get people to get off their back about climate change. Make it not the oil company's fault.
It's not their fault.
Make it the consumer's fault.
It's your fault for buying our oil. It's your fault for using so much plastic. Well, guess what? When you got all the cards, when you hold all the power, it's really easy to make people feel like they don't have a choice.
At the point that every new car is being sold is an electric car, then we will be at a point where there will be enough used on the market and enough chargers that you could make it a little bit of a personal responsibility thing.
Yeah.
If you're just hanging onto that car because you're a stubborn asshole, but that's not where we're at. And it's definitely not where we were at in 2004 or 5.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, the carbon footprint thing, just push that out of your head. Just don't even worry about it. Most average middle to lower income families, you got to do what you got to do to get by.
And most of the average person's carbon footprint that is not in their control, because it's the government and the power grid and other things that you don't actually control.
Right.
The supply chain that got the stuff that you bought ends up being a big part of it, and you don't control that. The areas of active control, what are considered active control, are the areas of basically how new is your home, how new is your car, and how much money do you have. Ironically, the more money people have, typically the higher their carbon footprint, even though it's the people with the more money who have the better chance of actually lowering that.
Yeah. So that is a useful thing to target.
Yeah.
So people who are, the word privilege gets thrown around a lot, but in this case, yeah, the people who are privileged enough to try to go for zero waste or try to reduce plastic in their lives, get the electric vehicles or scooters or whatever. That is good. I think that's a good targeting, but it is oftentimes picked up by the media as an overarching global umbrella for everybody. And I recognize that that's just not legitimate. That is not productive or helpful. And if anything, damages the movement.
When we should be trying to get our electric companies to switch over, where you should be making a decision is if you have the choice between getting a new standalone central air conditioner or furnace. Instead, pay the little bit extra. Right now, your power company or the government might actually help pick up the tab on that extra cost and put in a heat pump. That's an area where personal responsibility can actually apply. If you are honestly making a even choice between an electric car and a gas car, and both are viable options for you in your life, get the electric car. Those are the areas where those decisions really need to happen. Otherwise, we need to be pressuring governments and companies.
And building infrastructure to make it possible for people who can't afford those decisions to make them in the near future.
One of the biggest ways that
you don't end up like California saying, we're not going to sell gas-powered vehicles. Also, don't charge your vehicles because we can't afford it on the electric grid. Right. Like this last week. So, okay, there's going to be some tough steps there. Let's address that.
And one of the biggest areas is getting the government to actually use less carbon, which in the U.S. is
terrible. We're wasteful as
mostly the military.
Womp womp.
Fortunately, the biggest ships run nuclear reactors and aren't just burning oil.
No, I mean, you look at military uses a lot, and shipping of products is huge.
It is, but the shipping keeps getting more efficient as the ships keep getting bigger.
They do, yeah. And we just need to keep encouraging them.
Yeah.
And maybe find alternatives to the weird shipping lanes that we have these days, because it is effed up.
Oh, yeah.
The supply chain of products is, like, messy.
Trucking is a huge amount of the carbon emissions. Shipping is, outside of trucks, is actually pretty low because of how much is on the ships, how many consumers are benefiting from that. It's actually gets spread out pretty well. With trucks, that shrinks way, 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 way down.
Yeah.
And if it's a truck hauling a container of goods from the port of LA to Nebraska, that's a lot of diesel getting burned.
Yeah, and it doesn't end there because then you have to unload from the truck, take it to another truck, delivers it to your neighborhood store, unload it from that truck delivers it to your home. And that's never been a problem before. But delivery to homes is like increased 100-fold in the past 2 years.
One of the areas that the pandemic did help was by cutting down on business travel, because the area where the rich have the highest carbon footprint is air travel.
Oh, people will fly across the country or to other countries for a 3-hour meeting.
Mm-hmm.
It's dumb, and everybody knows it now. It broke, I think it pulled the veil away when people thought that they were required to go into work to do certain things or to travel to do certain things. When, nope, you got Zoom. It's not perfect, but oh my God, it needs to stop.
My stepbrother's last job in the Army involved tons of travel on largely those United States of America Learjets.
Yeah.
If you've driven by certain airfields, you've seen. I saw those in England. Tons of travel in those. We're talking back and forth between the Middle East and the United States, sometimes several times in a single week.
Yeah.
That is an insane amount of carbon.
Military and businesses and big corporations can claim security reasons for that. That they face-to-face is safer or IP, intellectual property, than anything related to an online connection. Fix that.
Yeah.
There. Fixed it. Now, I do love the movement for tracking private jets.
Yeah.
That one guy who got really famous for it. Watching how many very rich, very travel-oriented people, how much they waste bopping around the country.
Yeah.
Like, this is stupid, you guys.
Yeah.
If you want to live in New York, go live in New York. Don't live in LA and then travel to New York every week. That's dumb.
But I know I did it and have done that in my career, where flew from Portland to LA for a 1-hour interview. I had one time I flew from Seattle to Atlanta for a 4-hour meeting.
And they have to put you up in hotels and do all this stuff. And a lot of the economy is wrapped up in business travel.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I thought the pandemic was a great excuse to rip off the Band-Aid in that. And it mostly has, but we're ramping it back up again. Big time. And it's like, no, let's not go back to that.
Yeah. Okay, but so anyway, the big distraction is personal responsibility. We need systems to change. And when the systems change, the people will change.
Yeah.
For consumers to make changes, we need the consumer choices to change.
You also need trust in the system.
Mm-hmm.
Recycling is a good example of that, where we were raised to recycle. You recycled everything, plastic, paper. It was drilled into us since elementary school that it was our personal responsibility to recycle. We found out 20 years later that a lot of that recycling infrastructure either never existed, was greatly abused, or just straight up lied to us about. And a lot of our recycling programs are now defunct because they don't have the money to exist.
Well, the number code recycling codes on plastic products, that wasn't a recycling code. It was intentionally made to look like the recycling symbol, while not technically being it.
Yeah.
As it's a plastic type identification code.
Yeah. That's all.
Meant to confuse people.
And it worked. It works because if you are only allowed to recycle plastics like 1, 2, 5, or whatever, you're not going to do it. And people don't anymore.
And in Boise, it's certain 1 and 2s only.
Yeah, because we were lied to.
Yeah. Okay, so the small distraction in all of this is the active carbon cycle, where there are, usually coming from people on the left, big concerns about carbon in the atmosphere that's in the active cycle being used, reused, or counting that as emissions to count against everything. This would include stuff like the carbon emissions from in particular, the methane emissions from dams, from the algae blooms.
Yeah.
The carbon released from tilling soil for farming, and biofuels and similar, where if you're concerned about the carbon being released from something that's carbon that was in the atmosphere earlier this year. It's now back in the atmosphere. Methane is a highly potent greenhouse gas. It's like 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide, but it only lasts for 12 years. It has a half-life of 12 years in the atmosphere. And after, on average, 12 years, methane will turn into carbon dioxide and water. Yeah, it's not good in the short term for carbon dioxide to be upcycled to methane, make it a worse greenhouse gas.
Not great.
Obviously, that's not good, but the numbers are generally pretty stable on a lot of those. It's the methane that is being added the carbon dioxide being turned into methane and returned to the atmosphere each year is, generally speaking, consistent year to year. So the actual increase isn't that much because old methane is being converted back into carbon dioxide.
Right.
So the getting hung up on that with methane it's a distraction. The real goal here is we need to stop burning fossil fuels. If that ends up resulting in more atmospheric CO2 being converted into methane, that sucks, but that's way better than just increasing the raw amount of carbon in the atmosphere.
Right.
I know that ends up being a little bit more complicated.
I'm confused as to what products you're referring to.
The first one is...
Obviously, there's pulling oil and natural gas and burning that stuff. Methane comes from... The biggest one I've heard is cattle. That's the one that... Cattle and dams.
Cattle, dams, and...
That's a much shorter cycle.
It's a shorter cycle.
Much less... But it did spike. I mean...
The amount of methane in dams is increasing because of temperatures increasing and the amount of algae going up as the temperatures go up.
Right.
So that part, yes, that is true. That part is getting worse.
Okay.
The methane emissions from cows has actually been pretty stable in the U.S. as the number of cows has actually stayed stable as they've gotten more efficient with beef operations, and love them or hate them, feedlots have resulted in being able to get a lot more meat out of fewer animals.
Right. Even if you're, family outcast vegan is telling you that you're destroying the earth by eating meat.
So the actual big problem with methane is natural gas, which is usually getting extracted through fracking. It has been destroying water supplies for certain areas. It has caused earthquakes in certain areas, and we absolutely need natural gas to help get off of coal.
That sounds like a damned if you do, damned if you don't. Such a sort of situation there.
What we can do to help fix that is increasing the flaring operations. That is where they burn off the excess natural gas. Russia's doing a ton of that right now. Because when you burn it...
Well, they're weaponizing it that way.
Yeah.
They're saying, no gas for you, burn.
Because when you're burning it off, at least you're pumping CO2 directly out of the earth and into the atmosphere, as opposed to methane. So that's a slight improvement in the short term. It is no improvement in the long term.
Okay.
Cutting down on leaks is a huge improvement in both the short and long term.
It is amazing how many leaks we have. Every oil operation, every natural gas operation has major leaks. And they're going on everywhere all the time. It's so inefficient.
Our gas meter just got replaced because they checked it and found it was leaking.
Yay!
So
God damn it.
our residence was leaking leaking methane into the atmosphere. When our old furnace died, they also found that it had been leaking, which meant we were paying money to pump methane into the atmosphere.
Yay us. Yeah.
That's the actual problem. We need to cut down on where methane is being used. We need to cut down on leaks. Tightening up the infrastructure a bit, like getting it out of homes, would be a huge step towards that.
Right. We wouldn't have had a leak if we hadn't had those products in the first place.
We had a heat pump, that wouldn't have been an issue.
It's not up to us, but...
We're renters.
Right. Those older buildings, if it's older than 15 years old, check.
Yep.
And check regularly.
So, all right, let's go ahead and get on to beef.
Beef. It's what's for dinner.
Hating on beef is pretty popular.
Like we did it for a year.
Blaming beef for climate change is popular. It is way more complicated than you are probably aware.
Yeah.
The average cow in the United States spends most of its life grass-fed on a pasture or rangeland, and then spends roughly the last year in a feedlot. On the rangeland, when you look at those water charts, that the water infographic memes that keep going around on how much water is used by a cow per pound of meat, and you'll have cows using like 8 times as much as pigs, which use twice as much as chicken, which uses twice as much as an almond, which uses twice as much as rice, which uses twice as much as...
Right.
Those count... That's counting what's considered green water, blue water, and gray water. Green water for beef, because most cows spend time pasture or range raised, every drop of rain that hits any land that cow ever touched gets counted on that cow as green water. The green water is the rainfall in the grazing area of that cow.
Okay.
Every single drop of water, it would have hit that spot the same whether the cow was there or not. And yes,
It has potential of being used by cow, therefore it is counted.
yes.
Okay.
Gray water is the amount of water that is needed to dilute down runoff to be safe for release into streams. Counting gray water when you're not removing the water from the water cycle is also not the same as
Consumed water.
blue water, which is surface and groundwater used for the animal to drink, for the crops to be grown. And this applies to just growing crops too.
Yeah.
The green, gray, and blue all get counted as well. And it gets counted for the cleaning of the processing facilities.
Yeah.
So green, blue, and gray. If you count all three, there's a bunch of stuff that looks really bad.
Yeah, that's great for ecology, but not really great for consumer-oriented marketing. I can definitely see that being a little confusing.
And so, yeah, if you're counting beef, most beef are being grass-fed with little or no irrigation involved in the majority of their life. They are getting ground or surface water for drinking water the last roughly year of their life in the feedlot. Most of what cows are being fed in feedlots is actually non-irrigated crops in the Midwest and the South. So do you count crops that are raised with no irrigation, or should we just be worried about the water for crops where we're pumping out of the California aquifer and using the California aqueducts for irrigation?
Right.
Like, when you start looking at water like that, the charts that make cow's milk and almond milk look about the same start to look like propaganda from the almond growers.
Right, because there's been billions of dollars put into that. Everybody in California knows that. Soy also does a lot of marketing to make their product look less water intensive.
Even though a lot of soy, especially what's being fed to cows in feedlots, is quote unquote dry farming, where it's not irrigated.
Right, they're based off of natural rainfall or natural rainfall,
which has its own issues because that's where you have the massive monoculture in the Midwest. That's why there's the massive monoculture in the Midwest.
Where everybody grows just corn or just soy.
Yeah.
Okay.
And wheat.
They're
products that they can grow without needing to irrigate. So less labor intensive.
Which makes sense. It's cheaper.
Yet they grow so much that they end up selling it super cheap that get turned into processed food in very, very high amounts.
The farmers don't get squat because they have to sell it for so cheap.
There is also a confounding problem with cows on how bad are they is only about 2 to 5% of what cows eat are food that could have otherwise been fed to humans.
Oh, yeah.
That's
think scraps for pigs. That stuff was never going to be eaten by people.
Pigs actually do consume a lot more of foods that could have been human.
Oh, really? Well, yeah. Well, pigs will eat anything.
Especially soybeans, corn.
But cows
eat
what? Hay?
Hay and chaff.
Yeah.
So the shell of the oat that even in your steel cut oats you don't get, that's cow and pig feed. The stalks from the wheat become hay to feed cows. The soybeans, after they've extracted the soy oil, most of what's left over is waste because they can't sell enough TVP to people. That gets fed to livestock. Most of what humans are eating and what livestock is eating are not competing for the same part of the crop.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
It's vertical separation. So if we took cows completely out of the equation, then nothing would be eating those parts because nothing else is farmed at that kind of scale that has 4 stomachs. And without 4 stomachs, you can't break down the cellulose.
Right. Less cows, more waste.
Yeah. Theoretically, that could then be used to make biofuels.
Which is fine if that were the case. You know, there's no reason why we can't have that in our world. Except
for the fertilizer side of things.
Oh, wait, you did say this was complicated, didn't you?
Half of all fertilizer and 100% of all organic fertilizer is animal manure.
Yeah.
So those piles of cow shit you see around a feedlot is going to a field near you to help grow the lettuce that you want to have.
And eventually gives you E. coli at Wendy's.
So if you want lettuce and you want kale and quinoa
and soybeans, you need the fertilizer to grow it because nobody wants the synthetic fertilizers.
So that adds a whole other complicating...
So organic farming is causing its own problems.
Vegan organic is completely unsustainable and insane when you actually look at the fertilizer side. To do organic farming, you absolutely have to be feeding the chaff from the organic crops to the cows to turn that into fertilizer so you can continue growing the crops. Because ruminants, cows, deer, sheep, goats, moose, antelope, they're pronghorn, I'm not sure. I think pronghorn are... But anyway, they are highly efficient at converting the rest of the biomass that the rest of us can't and do it in a way that can actually add to the nutrient load of an area. This is not completely without problems. We see it in the West, where cows are doing that way too efficiently and increasing the nutrients of areas to a point where you get really, really nasty water, often because of the urea. That's absolutely critical for farming. You either need to be doing very careful crop rotation to get nitrogen fixing plants going, because most crops don't do nitrogen fixing themselves. They have to get it from their fertilizer.
Especially in a monoculture agricultural world that we have now.
Yeah.
People don't rotate the crops. You can't afford to rotate crops.
You just add fertilizer.
You get the most profitable crop that you can get, and you just farm it.
Until the soil's dead.
Until the soil's dead.
But we've seen it with the runoff in rural areas around Idaho and eastern Oregon where...
Oh, there is no such thing as a clean stream.
No.
Not when they've got cattle wandering everywhere from the sagebrush steppe all the way up to alpine forest. I mean, yeah, you will run into a cow camping out in the middle of a forest because that's public rangeland.
Yep.
I have my own issues with that. But yeah, you don't never drink from a stream because it's got cow piss and poop in it.
And the nitrogen levels, those are a factor in the algae blooms downstream.
Oh, yeah. We get toxic lakes up here all the time. And a large portion of that is because of the agricultural runoff.
And specifically, the nitrogen. The nitrogen that isn't captured causes algae blooms. Without that nitrogen, we couldn't have crops.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
Yeah, it is. And I do not envy the ecologists and the environmentalists and the agricultural specialists and husbandry specialists and all those at the top levels who have to make the hard decisions about what to do, because we can't farm like we did 50 years ago and maintain any semblance of climate control.
Yeah. And your unsweetened almond milk lattes are either going to be getting way more expensive or be going away soon because of the active desertification of the Central Valley of California, where 90% of the world's almonds are grown.
Yeah.
That also means almond flour that's popular in a lot of keto recipes will...
Yeah, all the gluten-free stuff.
They'll all be gone.
We have to switch over to something else, coconut or something, which is also...
has its own scalability issues.
It's complicated, and we've got to be aware of these things.
So water, though, is absolutely important to talk about because, in particular, the western U.S. and the Southwest and California, right now, California grows something in the ballpark of 70 to 90% of the U.S.'s vegetables. We don't grow vegetables other places because California can grow them so well. Well, California is drying up.
Yeah.
Arizona is making major cuts. That's where most of our winter lettuce comes from.
Yeah. Yuma. For miles. It's lettuce.
Drought is going to be changing dietary patterns when you can't get lettuce in the winter. Crops are going to have to change because that vegetable production is going to have to be moved to elsewhere. Most likely to places that are currently being monocultured with corn and soy.
Looking at you, Midwest.
That's going to be hard.
That's going to be very hard because they, the reason why they monoculture corn and soy is because it is so profitable. Farms run in the red line all the time, and losing a crop will make or break the farm.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, never mind the fact that most farms are conglomerates and owned by like a single person anyway. But that doesn't belittle the work that the farm manager actually goes through. And you're going to tell them that, okay, you're going to have to start planting this crop at a 50% loss.
Yeah.
They're just going to bag it.
Yeah.
But that means less kale, less lettuce, less whatever. Most of the corn we grow isn't even edible corn. It's fuel corn.
Yeah.
We need to get, yeah. Self-sustaining agriculture in the U.S. has Hasn't been around for a long time.
Yeah.
It's all imported or exported or whatever.
But water is absolutely critical on this.
You can't import and export water.
Realistically, looking at California that's an absolute mess.
I'm sorry, California. You're a mess. You're a hot mess.
The majority of the agriculture in California will die as California continues. The mega drought needs to start being called desertification. That desertification process will also result, the stuff we already talked about. It's also going to impact the wheat production in the Northwest, where
the PNW is not going to be the beautiful, green, shiny, rainforesty PNW much longer.
All the canola or rapeseed that gets grown, that's not likely to last for much longer. And it's going to reach the point where, realistically, the only food that can be grown in much of the West is beef, sheep, and goats.
You need to be switching over to more goats.
Goats are great for that. Like in Jordan.
There's a reason goats flourish in desert.
Yeah.
They eat anything. Tastes good, too.
But if you look at the USDA has a really good breakdown of water published a year ago that I've got linked to in the show notes, that they explicitly exclude green and gray water because they recognize that as meaningless when you're actually talking about the water consumption of making something.
Yeah.
But they do look at the full life cycle of that water, including the washing and processing and cleaning. So cows don't get blamed for the rain that fell on them, but they do get blamed for hosing down the meat processing plant. Likewise, your triple washed lettuce gets counted for all three of those washes.
Yeah.
So from 2012, 70% of all of the water used from surface and ground sources in the United States was for non-food system uses.
Okay.
Food system surface water was 21%. So that is agricultural, that's irrigation coming from dams, primarily, from rivers. And 9% was groundwater. That's irrigation being pumped out of an aquifer. 70% is non-food system. A shockingly high amount of that is watering lawns.
Yeah.
Which is also complicated and varies greatly depending on where you live.
Yeah. And is completely out of a lot of people's control, because there is a lot of people who are buying homes in developed subdivisions that are based entirely on how much sod is available. Mm-hmm. You don't find modern subdivisions with a choice of, xeriscaping, native plants, and lawn.
Yeah.
You don't get that choice. You can choose the color of your house, but that's about it. So that's going to take, and people have been working on it. Native landscaping is becoming more popular. Xeriscaping has its own drawbacks, but is becoming more popular. And, but the Kentucky bluegrass 1950s white picket fence lawn it needs to go to the wayside because we just can't afford it.
The 2012 crop production, or 2012 food system water, so the 30% of all ground and surface water used in 2012 in the U.S., 63% of that was for crop production. Irrigating crops. 6% of that was used for livestock production.
Okay. It's not very much.
Processing and packaging was a small amount. Distributing and marketing was a small amount. The energy used, so just energy was 13% of the water usage.
Like hydroelectric dams or?
This would be in the power plants.
Nuclear rods.
Nuclear, coal, and natural gas actually all run on water.
Okay, yeah.
It's water turbines. When you look at that part of the generation, it's actually a lot like a dam.
Yeah.
And 16% was household use. Food-related household water use.
Okay. So washing
Washing your vegetables.
boiling, cooking, steaming, that kind of stuff.
Probably washing your dishes would be included. Double the amount used for livestock production, used in people's homes. That one blew me away.
That is surprising. That is a surprising amount of water. Well, at the same time, once I think about how much water we do use for food-related items, not that surprising.
Yeah. Breaking down food usage or food production even more. So that's now breaking down the 84% of the 30%. 21% went to growing fresh vegetables. If almost all of that is in California and Arizona, we're fucked.
Okay, yeah.
Completely fucked. Beef, pork, and other meats used up 10% of the 86 or 84% of the 30%.
Yeah, we're getting. I'm sorry, I'm getting confused.
So just on the direct food production, beef, pork, and other meats was 10% of the water.
Okay.
At this point, you're including the crops that they're eating.
Yeah.
Or the portion of the crop that they're eating. Cereals, so your various grains, was 6%. Fresh fruit was 8%. Bakery products, separate from cereals. So taking the grains, already using 6%, and turning it into a bakery product adds another 6%.
Oh, it doubles the amount of water being used?
Yeah.
Oh.
In the baking process.
No?
Non-alcoholic beverages account for 5%. So that's your soft drinks.
Soft drinks and juices?
Mm-hmm. Alcoholic beverages account for 5%.
That blows my mind. But then again, we do consume a lot of beer. And beer is almost all water.
Yep. And grain.
Yes.
So you got the water from the grain plus, yeah, and then additional categories fill out the rest of the 20%. That includes sugar and sweets, poultry, fats and oils, processed fruits and vegetables, processed dairy products, fresh milk, fish and seafood, and eggs. Those together all make up 20%. The one that I think should be the final one to talk about on this, and then I think we can call this done, is the water use trade-off on dietary patterns in 2007.
Okay, we're getting a little old there, but...
Yes, when you're dealing with meta-studies that are looking at studies, and these are studies that require a ton of data that take a lot of time to process. Yeah. But in 2007, people who ate a base standard American diet used about 275, had a water footprint, if you're just looking at the blue water, of about 275 gallons per day per person.
Wow, okay.
It's for the base standard American diet with a mix of milk, meat, eggs, legumes, grains, fruits, vegetables, fats, oils, and salad dressings, and sugars and sweets. If you look at the minimum difference healthy omnivore, it's about 315 gallons per day.
Okay, so getting away from processed foods and more into whole foods. Health, quote unquote, healthy omnivore. Okay.
Yeah. So the sugars and sweets go from being 50 gallons down to about 20 gallons a day, while the fruits go from making up about 30 gallons to 75 gallons.
Right.
Fruit
trade-off there
uses a lot of water because it grows on trees.
Yep.
Nuts use a lot of water because they grow on trees, and you have to grow the entire tree and all the leaves.
Right. That makes sense.
For the minimum difference healthy vegetarian, we would assume, based on all the memes going around and articles and everything, that the healthy vegetarian would be consuming a lot less water than the healthy omnivore. And the answer is exactly the same.
No. Okay.
Legumes, nuts, and seeds.
Increase their legumes.
An increase in milk and milk products.
While taking out the meat.
And that completely counteracts any benefits from cutting meat.
Okay.
In terms of actual water usage.
So no moral superiority there.
When you're looking at minimum water healthy omnivore and minimum water healthy vegetarian, the minimum water healthy omnivore cuts all legumes, cuts almost all grain products, cuts nearly all fruit, cuts down on milk and keeps the same amount of meat, cuts out all sugars and sweets, fats, oils, and salad dressings, and has like standard American diet amounts of vegetables. To me, that looks kind of like a low-carb or keto diet.
That's besides the low fat, that's exactly what that is.
100 gallons a day.
Okay. Wow.
So a third of
way down
of the water of a minimum difference healthy vegetarian or healthy omnivore, and significantly less than half of the water of the baseline standard American diet.
Yeah.
Minimum water healthy vegetarian uses a little bit less water than the healthy omnivore, with no milk or milk products, a decent amount of legumes, nuts, and seeds, way less than the minimum difference healthy vegetarian, a significant amount of grains, about the same, small amount of fruit, and the same amount of vegetables as the healthy omnivore. So if you're replacing meat with fruit, you're not improving your actual water consumption.
Not that you should be basing your diet on water consumption. No. You should be basing it on what your body tolerates and makes you healthy. But yeah.
But what this shows is the biggest way to cut down on how much water it takes to feed you is to cut out the processed foods. Going from standard American diet to a healthy diet with just as much or with a lot of processed foods increases your water consumption. Cutting out the processed foods cuts your water consumption down by a ton.
Yeah. And that's a hard thing for people to do because processed foods are cheap.
Mm-hmm.
Carbs are cheap. Pastas, breads, pastries, even your Starbucks coffee is like, it's just the standard American way of living, which we've known for 100 years is not a good way to eat.
Yeah.
But you have to come to it and control it in your own terms, which is hopefully the more information that's out there will lead to better diets all around.
And if the White House is having a big food conference, and the talking points that have already been announced that the people going really want to be talked about is how to get poor people off of processed foods and onto fresh produce.
Yeah.
Because the processed foods are killing us.
Yep. That's why we spend more money on healthcare and have lower
outcomes.
Way lower outcomes. Like I said, you gotta kind of come to it on your own terms, but yeah.
And it turns out you can do any kind of eating from damn near carnivore to vegan in a way that is water conscious or in ways that are not.
Yeah.
So don't judge.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Just don't judge what people are eating, what they're drinking. Don't tell people that the way they're eating is killing the earth, because when you look at the actual numbers, it's not making that big of a difference.
And it's way more complicated than that.
The carbon emissions also are way more complicated, and the methane is still active in the environment, and the amount of methane being released by all of the cows in the U.S. is only slightly more than all of the wild ruminants that were in North America prior to Europeans arriving. Back when there were so many more deer and elk and moose, that number's actually relatively similar. So it turns out the U.S. as a landmass has been putting out doing roughly similar conversion of carbon dioxide to methane for since the Ice Age.
Bison.
It's wild. There are ways to improve all of that, though. If we want to cut down on how much methane cows are producing, we can cut down on how much they burp.
Stop feeding them so much corn and soy?
Yep. They can't digest it well, but they gain weight really fast.
Yeah.
If they kept eating like that, they'd have diabetes. If you feed them what they can naturally digest, they gain weight slower, but they produce less methane. There are methane capture systems starting to get installed at a lot of feedlots where the manure pools actually have covers over them that capture the methane to then get piped to natural gas plants or to help supply methane for homes. Like, there are ways to actually, and like, that is methane that is actively in the carbon cycle, not fossil fuel methane that we're pumping out of the earth through fracking.
Yeah.
It is so complicated.
Yeah. And that was a very dense episode, which I apologize for. But this is what happens when you let Dustin deep dive into something for several weeks.
No, years. Years. I have been digging into this for years. When we spent a year eating nearly vegetarian, yes, I got smug about it because it fit with all the liberal narratives of that's great for the environment. But I never felt confident enough with that statement to make those claims on the podcast.
Apparently for good reason.
I wanted to do...
And then it destroyed your body, so...
Yeah, I wanted to do an episode a year ago on how meat is destroying the environment. And I couldn't get enough to actually be able to support an argument.
But you were able to label it as a distraction.
Yeah.
Boy, howdy is it.
So that's it for this week. The voicemail line definitely works. I got a spam call on it.
All right.
And it downloaded correctly. So I've got that all working. So feel free to leave us a message at 208-996-8667. You could also leave us a voice message at htotw.com/speakpipe, or just record something on your phone and email it to us.
That's cool.
You can use the contact form on the website, htotw.com/contact, or send us an email, contact@htotw.com. If you want to send us an encrypted email, you can do so at secure@htotw.com. If you want to support the show, you can do so on a monthly basis with Patreon, just like did. And if you got the decimal and the wrong point in making your pledge, I won't feel bad if you change that. If that was intentional, then oh my God, thank you so much.
He's going to hear that and be like, wait, what did I do? Just double check, yo.
Yeah. Oh my God, thank you so much. If you want to do a one-time donation, you can do so at htotw.com/donate, and you can use PayPal, credit, debit, Apple Pay, or Google Pay. You can also get 35% off at our store at htotw.com/store.
You need a new mug.
September 15 to 17.
It's almost pumpkin spice time. You need a new mug.
Until next time, remember, not all those who wander are lost.